Hi, have a nice listen. Don't forget to like and comment on what you think of this story. If you'd asked me a month ago, I would have said my life was perfect. I had the dream wife, the ideal home, and a marriage people always seemed to admire. Stephanie and I had been together for 7 years. Years filled with love, shared dreams, and enough little arguments to keep things interesting. We were that couple who had the inside jokes, the quirky routines, and the kind of chemistry that friends would comment on during dinners. But lately, things had felt off. It started subtly, like the occasional glance at her phone when she thought I wasn't looking, or the sudden increase in girls' nights that I wasn't invited to. I tried to brush it off because I didn't want to be that paranoid husband who questioned every little thing. After all, she had never given me a reason not to trust her, until that night. It was a Saturday evening, and we had plans to meet up with friends at a new bar that had just opened downtown. Stephanie had been acting strange all day, quieter than usual, almost as if she was lost in thought. She'd spent more time on her phone than talking to me, and every time I tried to start a conversation, she'd give me short answers, then go back to scrolling. When it was time to head out, she dropped the first bomb. "You know, I'm not feeling great. I think I'm gonna sit this one out," she said, forcing a tired smile. "You should go without me and have a good time." I thought it was odd since she'd been the one excited about the night out in the first place, but I went along with it, figuring she genuinely wasn't up to it. At the bar, I found myself distracted. My friends noticed and kept asking what was up, but I didn't have a good answer. After a couple of hours, I made up an excuse and decided to leave early. Something about the way Stephanie had been acting didn't sit right with me, and I needed to get home. When I pulled into the driveway, her car was gone. I checked my phone for a message or a missed call. Nothing. It was almost midnight by the time she came home. When she walked in, she looked surprised to see me, as if she hadn't expected me to be there. "Where were you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Just went for a drive to clear my head," she replied, barely making eye contact. Her tone was light, but something felt rehearsed. The next few days didn't get any better. Stephanie's behavior grew even more suspicious. She'd be glued to her phone, always typing away or scrolling, and whenever I came close, she casually locked the screen and put it down. I kept telling myself not to jump to conclusions, but there was a voice in my head that wouldn't shut up. Something was definitely going on. One night, when she fell asleep on the couch, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to know if my instincts were wrong. With my hands trembling, I took her phone off the coffee table and unlocked it. There weren't any obvious red flags, no scandalous messages or suspicious photos. But then I found a new contact saved under the name Cameron. Their conversation seemed harmless on the surface, just a lot of small talk and some inside jokes that didn't seem to include me. It wasn't what was in the text that worried me. It was what was missing. There was a strange emptiness in their exchanges, almost as if they were purposefully avoiding anything that could raise suspicion. And that's when I knew I needed to dig deeper. After finding the texts from Cameron, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had taken hold of me. It gnawed at the back of my mind like a constant whisper. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to paranoia. But every time I saw Stephanie pick up her phone, the knot in my stomach tightened. It wasn't just the texts. It was the way she seemed distant, her mind always somewhere else. I decided to confront her about it in a roundabout way. Over dinner one night, I casually mentioned Cameron. "Hey, Steph, I noticed you've been talking to a new friend, Cameron. Who's that?" I kept my tone light, trying not to sound like I was accusing her of anything. She barely flinched. "Oh, Cameron? He's just a guy from work," she said, shrugging. "We've been working on a project together, so we've been chatting more." Her explanation was smooth, almost rehearsed, like she'd already anticipated the question. But something didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way she didn't elaborate, or the way she quickly changed the subject to something else. It felt like she was deflecting, Over the next few days, I couldn't help but observe her more closely. The pattern was always the same. A quick glance at her phone, a faint smile, and then she'd lock the screen the moment she noticed me looking. It was driving me insane. The more I watched, the more convinced I became that there was more to the story than she was letting on. I started to dig for more information. I knew a guy who worked in IT for her company, John, a good friend of mine from college. I casually asked him if he knew Cameron. He hesitated, looking almost uncomfortable before he answered. Cameron? Yeah, he's a newer guy, joined about a year ago. Kind of a smooth talker, if you know what I mean, John said, his voice low. Why do you ask? I shrugged, trying to sound indifferent. Steph mentioned him, that's all. Said they're working on a project together. John's eyes narrowed a bit, like he was putting something together. Well, just be careful, he said, sounding more serious than I'd expected. I've heard some rumors about him. Not exactly the most professional guy, if you catch my drift. His words stuck with me, and I started to feel like I was playing detective in my own life. I began coming home at different times to catch Stephanie off guard. One evening, I got home earlier than usual, around 5 p.m., and found her in the backyard talking on the phone. As soon as she saw me, she ended the call abruptly, her smile fading. Hey, you're home early, she said, almost too cheerfully. Yeah, got out of work sooner than expected, I replied, trying to read her expression. Who were you talking to? Just my mom, she said without hesitation. But the way she avoided my gaze made it hard to believe. It felt like she was lying straight to my face, and I couldn't let it go. Later that night, when she was in the shower, I took the opportunity to check her phone again. The texts with Cameron were still there, but now they seemed to have a different tone. There were subtle references to things that didn't make sense, inside jokes I'd never heard before, and a message that read, "Last night was fun. Let's do it again sometime." My heart sank. I couldn't breathe for a moment as I stared at those words. Last night? What did that mean? Stephanie hadn't been anywhere the previous night, at least, not as far as I knew. I had to find out more, but I wasn't going to confront her without solid proof. If she was lying to me, I needed to know the full extent. The next step was to follow her and see where she was really going on those girls' nights. It felt wrong, like I was becoming someone I didn't recognize, someone who spied on his own wife. But at that point, I had no choice. If my marriage was falling apart, I needed to know why. The following week, I put my plan into action. Stephanie mentioned another girls' night coming up, and I pretended to be my usual supportive self, even offering to order her an Uber. She seemed relieved, as if she was glad I wasn't putting up a fight. That only fueled my suspicions. When she left, I gave it about 30 minutes before getting in my car. I followed her Uber from a safe distance, my heart racing the whole way. I half hoped she was just going to meet her friends, and I'd have to deal with the guilt of being the paranoid husband. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't be that lucky. As her Uber pulled up to a trendy bar on the other side of town, I parked a block away and watched her get out. She didn't meet up with any girlfriends. Instead, she stood by the entrance, checking her phone, and within minutes, a man appeared beside her. He wasn't some random stranger either. It was Cameron. I watched as they greeted each other with a hug that lasted a bit too long. They walked into the bar together, and I knew that whatever excuse Stephanie had given me for tonight was just a cover. There was no girls' night. There hadn't been for a long time. I waited outside for what felt like forever, wrestling with my thoughts. I could confront them right then and there, cause a scene and get my answers. But the rational side of me held back. I needed more than just the sight of them together. I needed undeniable proof. I drove home, my mind racing with scenarios of how to catch her in the act. The next day, I called up a private investigator, Rick, who specialized in these kinds of situations. I explained what was going on and what I needed. "Don't worry," he said confidently. "I'll get you what you're looking for." It only took a few days for Rick to gather information. When he called to tell me he had something, my stomach dropped. We met at a coffee shop, and Rick slid a folder across the table. "You're not gonna like this," he said, his expression serious. "But you deserve to know." I opened the folder and found photos of Stephanie and Cameron at various places, restaurants, parks, even a hotel. The last picture showed them walking out of a hotel together, hand in hand. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. It wasn't just a fling. It was a full-blown affair. As I stared at the evidence, I felt a mix of anger, betrayal, and an odd sense of relief. At least now I knew I wasn't crazy. But the question was, what was I going to do about it? My first instinct was to confront her and kick her out of the house, but something inside me wanted to play it smarter. If she had been lying to me for this long, I wanted to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. That night, I decided to act normal, as if I hadn't just seen pictures of my wife leaving a hotel with another man. I needed her to think everything was okay so I could gather more information. The next time she went out, I didn't follow her. Instead, I had Rick tail her again. If she thought she was getting away with it, she'd let her guard down. And that's exactly what happened. A week later, Rick called me up again. "I've got something big," he said. I followed them to a cabin about an hour outside the city. They spent the entire weekend there. The whole weekend. She had told me she was at a work retreat with her colleagues. As I listened to Rick, I could feel the anger boiling inside me, but I stayed calm. I had all the evidence I needed now, and it was time for Stephanie to face the truth. But I wasn't just going to confront her. I was going to make sure that when I did, she had nowhere to hide. I started planning a way to reveal everything to her in a way she'd never forget. I spent the next few days meticulously planning the confrontation. It wasn't enough just to show Stephanie the evidence. I needed to make it undeniable and unforgettable. I wanted her to realize how deeply she had hurt me and just how much she had underestimated my resolve. So, I decided to organize a little gathering at our house. I told Stephanie I was planning a small dinner party with a few close friends and some of her colleagues, which she seemed surprisingly excited about. The night of the dinner arrived, and I felt a strange calmness wash over me, almost like I had already made peace with what was about to happen. As guests started to arrive, I made sure to keep up appearances, greeting everyone warmly and doing my best to play the charming host. Stephanie looked radiant that night, dressed in a red dress that used to be my favorite. It felt ironic now, knowing she had probably worn something similar for Cameron. As we sat down to dinner, I made sure to keep the mood light, cracking a few jokes and making small talk with everyone. Even Stephanie seemed to be enjoying herself, probably thinking this was just another ordinary evening. But she had no idea that I had something special planned for dessert. After the main course, I stood up and tapped my glass to get everyone's attention. "I have a little surprise for all of you," I said, glancing briefly at Stephanie, who looked curious. I wanted to show a little slideshow I put together, just a few memories from the past few months. Stephanie's expression shifted slightly as I walked over to the TV and connected my laptop. I could see her starting to tense up, probably sensing that something wasn't right. The first few pictures in the slideshow were innocent enough. Photos of us with friends, family gatherings, even a few silly selfies. But then, as the slides progressed, the images started to change. The first picture that caught everyone's attention was one of Stephanie and Cameron hugging outside the bar. I could see the confusion spreading across the room as people tried to understand what they were looking at. Stephanie's face went pale, and her mouth opened slightly, as if she was about to say something, but I didn't give her the chance. The next photo appeared on the screen, Stephanie and Cameron leaving the hotel together. There was an audible gasp from some of the guests, and I could feel all eyes turning towards Stephanie. Her expression quickly shifted from shock to anger. "What the hell is this?" she spat out, her voice trembling. I calmly turned to face her. "This, Stephanie, is the truth. The truth you've been hiding from me for months." I could see the panic in her eyes as she struggled to come up with an explanation. "You're making this look worse than it is," she stammered, her voice growing louder. "It's not what it seems." "Oh, really?" I shot back, my voice finally betraying the anger I had been holding in. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been having an affair with Cameron for quite some time now. Or are you going to deny spending the weekend with him at that cabin?" Stephanie's face flushed red with a mix of embarrassment and rage. I can explain," she began, but I cut her off. "Explain what, exactly? That you've been lying to me, to our friends, to everyone?" I took a step closer to her. "Or maybe you'd like to explain it to everyone else here. Go ahead, Steph. The floor is yours." She looked around the room, as if searching for someone to come to her defense, but the silence was deafening. Even her closest friends didn't seem to know what to say. It was as if the reality of her betrayal had left everyone speechless. "Fine," she finally said, her voice low. "Yes, I was with Cameron. But it was a mistake, okay? I messed up. It wasn't serious, and it's over now." I let out a bitter laugh. "A mistake? A mistake is forgetting to take out the trash, not carrying on a secret relationship behind your husband's back." I could see her trying to regain some composure, but the damage was done. The truth was out there, and there was no taking it back. As the guests began to leave, giving me sympathetic looks and offering their condolences, I realized that this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Stephanie and I had a lot more to discuss, and now there were no more lies to hide behind. After everyone left, the house was eerily quiet. It was just Stephanie and me, standing in the living room where the air still hung heavy with the tension of the night's events. I could see her pacing back and forth, her eyes red and puffy. She was clearly struggling to find the right words. I leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed, waiting. I wasn't going to make it easy for her. If she was going to offer some kind of explanation, it had to be the truth this time. "Well," I said, my voice flat, "now that the audience is gone, what's your excuse, Stephanie?" She stopped pacing and turned to face me. "I'm sorry, okay?" she said, almost pleadingly. "I know I messed up, but I never wanted to hurt you. It was a stupid fling, a distraction. Things haven't been the same between us for a while, and I was feeling lost." "Lost?" I echoed, raising an eyebrow. "And you thought Cameron would help you find your way back?" She winced at my sarcasm. "No, it's not like that. It was never about him. It was about me," she insisted, though her voice faltered. I don't know, looking for something I felt was missing. I never meant for it to go this far." I shook my head, a bitter smile forming on my lips. "You know what's funny, Steph? I was feeling lost too. But instead of turning to someone else, I tried to work on us. I thought we were just going through a rough patch. Every marriage does. But you didn't give us a chance to fix it." She took a step closer, her eyes filling with tears. "I'm still in love with you," she said desperately. "We can fix this. We can go to counseling, take time to work things out. Please, don't throw everything away because of one mistake." "One mistake?" I repeated incredulously. "Steph, this wasn't just one night of bad judgment. You lied to me for months. You planned these rendezvous with Cameron. You betrayed me every single time you walked out that door to meet him. That's not a mistake. That's a choice." Her tears were flowing freely now, and she covered her face with her hands, sobbing. I stood there, unsure whether I felt pity for her or just sheer anger at the whole situation. I'd thought the confrontation would bring me some sort of closure, but instead, it left me feeling emptier than ever. I walked over to the couch and sat down, putting my head in my hands. The silence stretched between us, broken only by her muffled cries. Finally, she spoke up again, her voice small and broken. "So, what now?" she asked, looking at me with red-rimmed eyes. Are you going to leave me? I exhaled slowly, the weight of her question pressing down on me. Part of me wanted to say yes, to end it right there and never look back. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the good times, the love we once shared, was hesitant. I don't know, I admitted, my voice hollow. I need time to think, to figure out if there's anything left to salvage. She nodded, her shoulders slumping in defeat. I'll stay with my sister for a while, she said quietly. Give you some space. She walked toward the bedroom, and a few minutes later, I heard the front door close behind her. As I sat there, staring at the empty living room, I felt a strange mix of emotions, sadness, relief, and something else that I couldn't quite name. Maybe it was a sense of freedom, knowing that whatever happened next was entirely in my hands. The next few days were a blur. Stephanie didn't call, and I didn't reach out to her. I found myself driving aimlessly after work, going to places we used to visit together, replaying memories in my mind like a broken record. I wasn't sure if I was torturing myself on purpose or just trying to understand where it had all gone wrong. Then, one evening, I got a call from Rick, the private investigator. I found something you should know about, he said, his voice serious. There's more to Cameron than we thought. What do you mean? I asked, my pulse quickening. Turns out, he's not just some guy from Stephanie's work. There's a deeper connection, one that goes back a lot further than either of them ever let on. Rick's words echoed in my mind as I hung up the phone. I hadn't expected there to be more to uncover, but I should have known better by now. If Stephanie was willing to lie about her affair, there was no telling what other secrets were hidden beneath the surface. I called Rick back immediately and asked him to meet me at his office to go over what he had found. The drive over was nerve-wracking. I could feel my grip tightening on the steering wheel, and my heart was racing, not from anger this time, but from a sense of dread. What more could there possibly be? When I arrived at Rick's office, he was waiting for me with a thick folder in his hands. He didn't waste any time. I did a deeper background check on Cameron, he said, setting the folder on the table. Turns out, he's not just some random coworker. He's Stephanie's ex-boyfriend. They dated for almost 2 years back in college. I felt a chill run down my spine. Wait, what? She never told me anything about an ex named Cameron, I replied, trying to piece together this new revelation. She said her last serious relationship was with some guy named Brad before we met. Rick shook his head. Well, looks like she left out a pretty big chapter. They had a serious relationship back then. Went on vacations together, even lived together for a while. There's more, though. I found out that they reconnected on social media about a year ago. It wasn't some accidental fling. They've been in contact for much longer than you thought. I sank back into my chair, feeling like the ground had just been ripped out from under me. The affair wasn't just about her feeling lost or seeking attention. It was about rekindling an old flame. Everything she told me about the affair being a mistake and not serious was just another lie. She knew exactly what she was doing when she let Cameron back into her life. Why would she keep this from me? I muttered, more to myself than to Rick. If it was just some random guy, I could almost understand. But her ex? Rick's expression was sympathetic. That's the thing, though. People reconnect with their pasts for a lot of reasons. Nostalgia, unresolved feelings, or just plain stupidity. But it looks like Cameron might have had his own agenda. What do you mean? I asked, feeling a mix of curiosity and apprehension. He's been dealing with some financial trouble. Gambling debts, from the look of it, Rick explained, flipping through the folder and pointing to some documents. It's possible he was using Stephanie. Who knows? Maybe he saw an opportunity in reconnecting with an old girlfriend who's now married and doing well. It all started to make sense. The nice restaurants, the weekends away, even the way Stephanie had begun to distance herself from me. Cameron had probably convinced her that they could be together again, that he was her second chance at true love. and she bought into it, thinking she was chasing some romantic fantasy, while he saw her as a ticket out of his problems. So, what now? I asked, feeling the weight of betrayal all over again. How do I confront her with this? Rick leaned back in his chair, his gaze steady. That depends on what you want, man. Do you want to give her a chance to explain herself again? Or are you ready to walk away? The question hung in the air as I considered my options. Part of me felt like I should just call her up, tell her I knew everything, and let her dig herself out of the hole she'd created. But another part of me, the part that had been lied to, humiliated, and deceived, wanted to see this through to the end, to expose not just Stephanie's lies but Cameron's too. I drove home that night with a sense of grim determination. This wasn't just about Stephanie anymore. It was about putting an end to all the lies and making sure Cameron didn't walk away unscathed. I needed a plan, one that would leave no room for either of them to deny what they had done. The next day, I texted Stephanie and told her we needed to talk. "Meet me at the cabin," I wrote. It was the same cabin where she and Cameron had spent their secret weekend. I figured it was only fitting that the truth came out in the place where they thought they could keep their lies hidden. As I drove out to the cabin, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I had all the evidence I needed, and this time, I wasn't going to let her twist the story. When Stephanie arrived, I could see the confusion on her face as she parked her car and walked up to the cabin's front door. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice cautious. "Why did you want to meet here?" I looked her in the eyes, my expression steady. "Because, Stephanie, this is where it all started, and this is where it's going to end." Stephanie's face went pale as she stood in the doorway, realizing I wasn't here to have a friendly chat. I could see her mind racing, trying to piece together what I knew and how much trouble she was in. I didn't give her a chance to speak. I reached into my jacket pocket, pulled out the thick folder Rick had given me, and tossed it onto the coffee table between us. "Go ahead, take a look," I said, my voice cold and calm. "That's everything I know about you and Cameron. Your little love story that's been going on behind my back for months. Or should I say years? I know he's not just some random guy from work, Stephanie. He's your ex." Her eyes widened as she glanced down at the folder, then back at me. I can explain," she stammered, taking a hesitant step forward. "It wasn't like that. I swear, I wasn't trying to replace you. I was just confused." "Confused?" I scoffed, folding my arms. "That's the excuse you're going with? You were confused. So you went back to your ex and lied to me for months? You didn't even have the decency to be honest about who he really was." Stephanie shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't want to lose you. Cameron, he just showed up in my life out of nowhere, and it brought back all these old feelings. I didn't know how to handle it." "Old feelings?" I interrupted, my anger bubbling to the surface. "The guy's in debt up to his neck. Did he tell you that? Or did he just paint a pretty picture of some perfect, long-lost love while he was using you to dig himself out of his financial mess?" She looked shocked, as if the thought had never occurred to her. What are you talking about?" "Gambling debts," I said bluntly. "He's drowning in them. So I'm sure it wasn't hard for him to charm his way back into your life, offering you a fantasy while he was really just looking for a way out. Tell me, did he ever ask you for money? Or maybe convince you to pay for those fancy getaways you two took?" Stephanie seemed to deflate before my eyes. Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth, and she sank down onto the couch. "Oh my God. He said he was just going through a rough time. But, no, I never gave him money. We did go out to some expensive places, but I thought he was paying." I could see the realization washing over her, the understanding that she'd been nothing more than a pawn in Cameron's game. She was no innocent victim, though. She had made her choices, choices that destroyed our marriage, regardless of Cameron's motivations. "I don't know what you expected to happen," I said, my voice softer but still edged with bitterness. Did you think we'd just go on with our lives like nothing happened? Did you think I'd never find out who he really was? Stephanie looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. I was going to end it, she whispered. I was. I just... I couldn't bring myself to do it. I didn't know how to let go of him, but I didn't want to lose you either. Well, now you've lost us both, I said, my tone final. I can't be with someone who kept this kind of secret from me. You've broken my trust in every possible way. I'm filing for divorce. The words seemed to hit her like a physical blow. No, please, don't do this, she begged, her voice breaking. We can still work through this. I'll do whatever it takes. Counseling, therapy, anything. Just give me a chance to make it right. I shook my head slowly. This isn't something that can be fixed with therapy, Steph. It's not just about the affair. It's about the lies, the secrets, the fact that you let this guy come between us without ever being honest about who he really was. That's not something I can just forgive. She crumbled, burying her face in her hands as sobs racked her body. I watched her for a moment, feeling an odd mix of sadness and relief. I had loved her once, more than anything in the world, but now that love was buried beneath the weight of all the lies she had told. I turned and walked out of the cabin, not looking back. The fresh air hit me as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, feeling a strange sense of freedom wash over me. For the first time in months, I wasn't trapped in the cycle of doubt and betrayal. I knew what I had to do next, and I was ready to move on. The divorce process wasn't easy, but it was straightforward. I had no intention of dragging it out or making it messier than it needed to be. We split our assets. I kept the house and she moved out. Stephanie tried to reach out a few times, sending messages apologizing and asking if we could at least talk, but I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. A few weeks later, I heard that Cameron's debts had finally caught up with him. He had skipped town, leaving behind a trail of angry creditors. It seemed fitting, in a way. The man who had come into my life like a storm had left just as suddenly, taking the chaos with him. As for me, I slowly began to rebuild. I wasn't sure if I'd ever truly trust someone again, but I knew I wouldn't let this define me. Stephanie and Cameron had their chance, and they chose deceit. Now, I was choosing myself. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that didn't include her.